time. So the appeals court, the Court of Appeals of the DC Circuit, has ruled that Donald Trump may stand trial and that presidential immunity does not apply. Most likely, I think they've even said his camp, Trump's camp, will be appealing. Now the next stop is the Supreme Court. And it's funny because I always look at the meta, the meta means above. So like the story about the story, which is the New York Times, actually allowed me into their paywall. They wanted everyone to read this article, right? So it was free, the one about Trump not having presidential immunity. And I loved it though, because it's so exactly what I would expect, how the New York Times would write up this article. Except for one thing. I was actually impressed that they talked about that this is temporary. In other words, it's not the final word on the matter. Probably because they realize that people are going to be expecting something, and then, depending on the Supreme Court, then their readers could be in for a real shock. By contrast, I didn't see anything in the media about the Texas razor wire standoff being temporary. There was an appeals court that ruled that there was a temporary injunction against the federal government cutting that razor wire at Shelby Park, which is in Eagle Pass, Texas, actually. Remember where I reported on that makeshift graveyard of migrants who had died like a year and a half ago? The media reported on this as if the federal government won, forever, 100%. And that's just not the case. So I was actually surprised by the standoff. I don't know what's going on now, right this moment at the border, but I was surprised that, truckers et al. Would be going down there because this is not fully decided yet. I mean, I understand that it could be made permanent, that Texas doesn't have jurisdiction to defend its borders. I realize that I'm using loaded language and that ultimately this is about language and semantics. However, for some reason, the New York Times decided to buck tradition and actually inform everybody that this appeals court decision ruling Donald Trump cannot claim broad powers of absolute immunity, it goes to the Supreme Court, as long as his campaign files the appeal by February 12th. So that's in 6 days, I guess. So, it immediately hit social media. I think the decision was made this morning in Washington. And like I said in my previous broadcasts, this is not about Donald Trump necessarily. This is about the other presidents. Think about it. Can they be charged for crimes committed while in office once they've left office and no longer have immunity? So this is more about other presidents and their crimes and their war crimes, lying to the American people, etc., about the wars. And then once it comes around election time, it's like everything, all the talk, that's all forgotten and everything. I'm not surprised that the DC Circuit Appeals Court made this decision about Donald Trump, because according to their decisions, they're considered pretty, what shall we say? Because it's not liberal anymore. It's way too uptight to be liberal. The current establishment narrative is way too uptight to be called liberal anymore. But the DC court said no one is above the law. And what this means is neither is President Clinton, President Bush, and President Obama. So we have to look at the long term and the big picture, because it's pretty tremendous that they ruled this way, actually. And the New York Times actually made an effort to point out that this has never been tested before, because there was never an opportunity, i.e. there were no serious crimes. Like, the media decides what's a crime and what's not. They decide who's guilty. So it's so funny. They're saying even now, even reporting on a court decision, they have the nerve, okay? The New York Times, the old gray lady, right? The old gray lady is the New York Times. They have the nerve to say that until now, basically, No president has ever done anything bad enough to be charged with a felony, okay? Quick clarification. Now, I know that the New York Times article didn't specifically say that the other presidents had not committed crimes, but observing what I've observed from people around me around this issue, just the fact that Trump has been charged is, to many people, is an indication that he's guilty. So the more you trust in the justice system, the more you're going to think that none of the other presidents really committed anything like this. But of course, that's neuro-linguistic programming, which we've been talking about. And everyone is susceptible. Like, I have to sometimes stop and think, wait, that's so ridiculous. I did that in my spoof from this summer. You know, my parody video with Brenda Bias and Phyllis Fax. But that's for the court to decide. Is it? President Trump has pleaded not guilty. In my personal opinion, we should wait and see rather than publishing articles saying that Trump is falsely comparing his situation to former presidents. Because, again, that is for the court to decide. In most cases, an indictment does not mean that the person is guilty. Well, but in President Trump's case, it is so clear that he flagrantly violated the law. And then, when the Department of Justice tried to retrieve the sensitive records, he refused to hand them over, which is why there had to be a raid. Well, I have part two still in the pipeline. This brings me to more media and manipulation, and that is this documentary on PBS that aired at the end of January.
The president's intent was to stay in power at all costs.
This election was stolen
I
from
flat out said, I swore an oath. I'm not going to break it.
I'm going to talk about it on Rumble. So check there to find out what I
They
think.
put their faith in Donald Trump, and he deceived them.
Maybe it's just me, but I think lying to get us into a war that resulted in the death of 1 million people is in a whole different league than something that has a lot of exculpatory evidence to the contrary. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and above all, keep calm and share complete facts.